this class we've talked about linear functions so far this year. Now we're going to move on to quadratic equations. So things with an x squared in it basically. And the first thing we're going to deal with today is factoring quadratics. Factoring is something that seems to plague students starting back with pre-algebra, algebra 1, but it's super important. It's a big part of being able to solve things and being able to work with different things. So let's just start with some very basic ones. The first rule of factoring is to make sure that you check to see if there's anything that every piece has something in common. So let's say we have y equals 4x squared minus 2x. So the first rule for factoring, like I said, is to see if there's anything that each piece has in common. If you look at these two pieces, 4x squared and 2x, they both have a 2 in common and an x in common. So I can factor this, and it would be 2x, I pull out front. Okay, if I pull a 2 out of the 4, that leaves a 2. If I pull an x out of x squared, it leaves x. And then I pull 2x out of 2x, that leaves a 1. Okay, make sure you put that 1 there. It doesn't leave nothing. It leaves 1. And then that's factored. Okay, let's try a similar one. Let's say we're told to solve 3x squared minus 9x equals 0. Again, the first rule of factoring is to see if there's anything that both pieces have in common. Well, both pieces have a 3 and an x in this case. That leaves me with x here and a 3 here. So I have 3x times x minus 3 equals 0. So if you remember, as long as one or the other piece equals 0, this whole thing is 0. So then we set both pieces equal to 0. Divide both sides by 3 over here and you get x equals 0. Add 3 to both sides here and you get x equals 3. So we would get x equals 0 and x equals 3. Okay, but sometimes you're not going to have anything that all the pieces have in common. For example, you may have something like x squared minus 7x minus 8 equals 0. Now here there is nothing that all three pieces have in common. Now you may be able to find things that two of the pieces have in common, but this only works, you only want to do it if you can find one where all the pieces have something in common. So if they don't all have something in common, then you have to do the method where we do two sets of parentheses. Okay, we know the front is going to be x's because we need to multiply to be x squared. Now we need to find things that multiply to be 8 and add up to negative 7. Multiply to be 8 and add up to negative 7. Okay, so one thing you can do if you need to is come over here and I'm just going to list the factors. We could do 1 times 8 or 2 times 4. So I need to figure out which one of those I can use to make a negative 7. Well, it looks like it's going to be 1 and 8. And if I want a negative 7, it's going to have to be a positive 1 and a negative 8. So 1 and negative 8 multiply to be negative 8 and add up to negative 7. So we get x plus 1 equals 0 and x minus 8 equals 0. So subtract 1 from both sides and you get negative 1. Add 8 to both sides and you get 8. So that would be our two solutions for that particular equation. Okay, let's try another one like that. Let's say we need to solve x squared plus 10x plus 21 equals 0. Again, there's nothing that all three pieces have in common, so we'll have to use this method. We put x's in front, and we need something that multiplies to be 21 and adds up to 10. So if it helps, come over here and list these out. 1 and 21, 3 and 7, and I believe that's it. So obviously the only way you can add up to 10 is with the 3 and the 7, so you use a positive 3 and a positive 7. So then if you set both of those equal to 0, you just subtract 3 from both sides and subtract 7 from both sides. And that's our two answers. Alright, now let's try a slightly harder type of problem. Let's say we have 2x squared plus 7x equals 4. Anytime you have different powers of x, like here we have an x squared and just an x to the first, you're going to almost definitely want to factor. And in that case, you don't want it equal to a number, you want it equal to 0. So the first step should actually be to subtract 4 from both sides and rewrite this as 2x squared plus 7x minus 4 equals 0. So for these kind of problems, the best thing to do is to make sure it's set equal to 0. Just move everything over to one side. Now, there's lots of different ways you can approach this type. You can do basically what we did before and kind of set it up this way and then guess and check to figure out what will multiply to be actually 8, because you need to multiply whatever these two put together would be. 2 times 4 is 8, and add up to 7. For me, I prefer something called the box method. So let me show you how that works. With the box method, you draw a box with 4 pieces, and you put the first term in the first box, and you put the last term in the last box, and then you multiply just their coefficients together. So I want 2 times negative 4, that gives me negative 8. Now I'm going to just list the numbers that give me 8, 1 and 8, or 2 and 4. Now I got to figure out the ones that will give me a positive 7. Okay, well that's going to be 1 and 8, and to do that I would need a negative 1 and a positive 8. And these two I just wrote down, you've got to put an x with them. So on this middle one, you've got to put x with them, with these two right here, the two I just wrote. You've got to put x's with them, and just so you know, it does not matter which one you put where. I could have put negative 1x in the lower left and 8x in the top right. That won't make any difference. Okay, once you get there, you need to go up the column and decide what do they have in common. So what does 2x squared and 8x have in common? Well, that would be 2x. Then you go up this column. What do 1x and 4 have in common? Well, you might say nothing, which is kind of true, but technically they always have 1 in common. Okay, and as far as the signs are concerned, positive or negative, whatever box you're touching is what you keep. So since it's touching negative 1x, we make it negative 1. So the first step is to go up both the columns, and then you go left on both of the rows. So 2x squared and negative 1x have an x in common. Negative 4 and 8x have a 4 in common. Since the 8 is positive, the 4 is positive. Whatever you're touching is the sign you keep. So this will factor to be 2x minus 1 and x plus 4. So I'm going to write that over here, 2x minus 1 times x plus 4. I set that equal to 0, and then solve for both. So 2x minus 1 equals 0, x plus 4 equals 0. Over here I add 1 to both sides, and then divide both sides by 2. So I get x equals 1/2. Here I just subtract 4, so I get x equals negative 4. Okay, now I'm going to show you one more like this, so you can get another crack at the box method here. Let's say we have 2x squared plus x equals 1. We have different powers of x. We have an x squared and we have an x to the first. So we need to move that over. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides, and I get this. Okay, again, your first step should always be to check, is there anything all 3 pieces have in common? No, there's not. I mean, except for 1, but it doesn't help us to pull out 1. So that means we just go with the normal factoring, or the other types of factoring. So since the reason I use the box is because of this number. If there's not a number in front of x squared other than 1, then I would just do what we did on the previous examples, where you just set up the two parentheses, figure out what multiplies with the last term, and adds up to the middle. But if it does have this number, that's when I would recommend using the box method. Okay, again, you draw a box with 4 parts. You put the first term up here in the first box. You put the last term down here in the last box. And then you multiply their coefficients together. You get negative 2. Okay, well there's only one way to get 2, and that's with 1 and 2. So we need to add up to this middle term, which is a positive 1. So we would have a positive 2x and a negative 1x. So remember, these two right here have to have x's with them, but it doesn't matter which one you put where. So I could have put the 2x low and the negative 1x high, and that would have been fine too. So now I move up the column. Those two have an x in common, the 2x squared and the negative 1x. Then I move up this column. 2x and negative 1 don't have anything in common except for 1. And since 2x is positive, that 1 is positive. Whatever you're touching, that's what you take the sign of. Now if I come this way, left, across the row, 2x and 2x squared have 2x in common. This way, negative 1 and negative 1x have a 1 in common, and since it's touching the negative, it becomes negative. So we get x plus 1 and 2x minus 1. So I set both of those equal to 0. Subtract 1 here, and I get x equals negative 1. Over here I add 1, and then divide both sides by 2. So I get x equals 1/2, and x equals negative 1. If you need practice with factoring, obviously do any homework I might assign you. Other than that, on page 128 in your book, there's lots of practice there.